Ladies and gentlemen, we got him.
Ding dong, the witch is dead. With the release of Kraven the Hunter, Sony has officially announced that they are done with their extended universe of Marvel movies. And I'm a little uncertain here if I should laugh in relief or cry. After all, these films kinda did the impossible by bringing together the entire internet to universally mock them.
Morgan time.
After my last video on who killed the DCEU, I got a lot of requests for who killed the Sony universe. But this is way less of a murder mystery because we pretty much know who did it. It was this guy. Yeah, so that's not all that fun. But then I got to thinking, the death of the Sony universe is not so much Avi Arad in the library with a candlestick, and more a case of SEAL Team 6 storming a building to take out a moderately annoying figure on the FBI's most wanted list. It is a collection of reoccurring and compounding mistakes, the same issues being repeated over and over again with each movie. So no, the death of the SSU, if we want to call it that, it was not a murder. It was an assassination. The question is not who did it, but why they did it. What is the leading cause of death that made this universe deserve a shallow grave? Now, as the mortician, I have 7 suspected causes. Like last time, the answer honestly is kind of all of them are at fault, at least to some degree. But I don't deal in half measures here, no. So there is a singular cause of death, and we're going to find it, beginning with suspect number 1, the Sinister Six.
It's fantastic.
Say that again?
It's fantastic.
Guys, I got it.
This was a strange obsession for Sony. Ever since the Avengers lit up the screen in 2012, Sony has sat there in the dark, watching the money roll in for Disney and fuming. That is until someone, Avi Arad, got the brilliant idea of, hey, why don't we just do the exact same thing? Kind of like how everyone else was trying to do the exact same thing around this time. There's just one tiny little minor problem with all that. Where the MCU had a massive library of properties from Iron Man to Captain America to Hulk and Thor, at this point, Sony only really owned the rights to Spider-Man. One character. It's kind of hard to form an entire universe off of just one character. Back in the 1990s, Marvel was going bankrupt, and in order to keep its head above the water, it sold off the film rights to its most popular characters at that time. As a result, these characters got scattered just around multiple different studios. Universal got Namor and the Hulk. Fox got the entire X-Men library, Daredevil, and Fantastic Four. Then Sony purchased Ghost Rider, and most importantly, Spider-Man. Now, it was this last one that was the real steal. Spider-Man was and is easily Marvel's biggest character, with tons of supporting characters, anti-heroes, and villains. Even better, it had already proved profitable with the successful Sam Raimi trilogy, bringing in a total of $2.2 billion at the box office. A rich vein for Sony to mine. And that's exactly what they were going to do, by golly. Avi Arad was the one who helped spearhead a lot of the efforts in the early 2000s for the Marvel films. And some came out as big successes, and others complete disasters. Very hit and miss. Avi Arad, he had co-produced Iron Man back in the day, but had been effectively forced out of Marvel Studios after Iron Man. One can only imagine he still dreamed of creating a franchise to rival Kevin Feige. Yet, it's in early 2010s that he began to lay the groundwork for a reverse Avengers. Instead of a team of superheroes assembling, Sony would assemble a team of villains. On paper, that doesn't actually sound like that bad of an idea. After all, the Sinister Six, they may be Marvel's most iconic team of supervillains. It's tackling a similar idea, but from a new angle. They even had a brand new Spider-Man to tie it all together. The Amazing Spider-Man had come out the previous year to a moderate financial success and moderate critical success. No one was really kind of singing its praises, but they went, it's all right, that's fine. In order to catch up to Marvel, Sony felt like they really needed to fast-track their world building. This was a mistake that also the DCEU had made, where the first film had potential, especially with the talented Andrew Garfield in the lead. The sequel effectively became a series of disconnected setups for sequels and spin-offs. Seriously, there's a whole plotline in The Amazing Spider-Man 2, where there's this cold open about Peter's parents being spies, and it never comes back into play in the film. There's no reason it's there. And that's kind of how it all is. A bunch of branching plot lines and seeing what maybe in the future has potential for franchise material. It's in rushing to the Sinister Six that The Amazing Spider-Man 2 became a massive mess. Even the core concept here was fumbled, as the film inferred that all the villains, they would essentially just get handed out their tech from Oscorp like candy to kids on Halloween. In this film, they introduced the Green Goblin, Electro, and Rhino as villains. And then, in a stinger, they showed Doc Ock's arms, Vulture's wings, and Venom just kind of waiting there in the basement. That's not exactly true to their characters, and frankly, not all that interesting. The Amazing Spider-Man 2 wasted its brilliant cast, and the film was just ripped apart by critics and audiences alike. When the movie underperformed at the box office, Sony finally folded and handed over Spider-Man to Marvel Studios on loan. It was honestly the best decision they could have made for both the company and fans. It led to Spider-Man's debut in Civil War and a $3 billion trilogy led by Tom Holland. In other words, everyone kinda wins. Yet, Avi Arad was not satisfied. He was one of the maybe few losers in the situation. Yet the Sinister Six became Avi Arad's dream project. He just needed the right launch pad. And he found it with one of the most popular characters in Spider-Man's rogue gallery, Venom. This was a character Arad had already forced Raimi to use all the way back in 2007 against his will. Yeah, Spider-Man 3, Raimi didn't really want to use him at all for that movie, which is why it was kind of overburdened by villains and different villain plot lines. But because Venom was a fan favorite, the producers wanted him in there. And you can see his appeal, because he is often regarded as both a villain and an anti-hero, sometimes an outright baddie, and other times a lethal protector. Yet a lot of Venom's origin is really intrinsically tied to Spider-Man. The whole origin really is that Spider-Man finds an alien costume, learns that it's a parasite, and then gets rid of it, and then that parasite finds a new host and comes back for revenge. And keep in mind, at this point, Spider-Man was in the MCU and was locked down over there, so they couldn't use him in a Venom movie, which leads to the question, how do you possibly do a Venom movie without Spider-Man? Don't worry, they're sure gonna try. And try Arad would, with a foolproof plan. He would take these Spider-Man villains and turn them all into anti-heroes instead, then bring them all together as a team like the Avengers. You know, it's a lot of maybes and even more optimism. It didn't go their way. Clearly. It's not even like they weren't forewarned about all this. There was a major email leak from Sony, and in it was revealed that Kevin Feige, he was offering some free, I don't know if it's free, but he was offering some script consultation. Many of his notes really pegged down the issues that made it into the final film. Evidently, all these notes were just ignored because all these problems made it into the final film. Even worse, the leak of the Sony emails revealed all the different spin-offs the studio had been planning. These included an early version of Venom, a Carnage film with Emma Stone playing, I guess, the ultimate version of Carnage? Okay. A Black Cat solo movie, which maybe has more potential than most things they've tried or done. Spider-Man 2099, Amazing Spider-Man 3, and, weirdly, a Tobey Maguire Spider-Man versus Andrew Garfield Spider-Man. I guess they kinda did that in No Way Home? Most infamously, there was an Aunt May spy movie, which I don't know if it's just a sadistic part of me, really kind of wanted to see that a little bit to see what they would have done. But the big thing on the list was, of course, the two-part Sinister Six movie from Drew Goddard. And now this whole list, it may look a little ambitious, but also let's remember most of it was probably wild ideas that they were just kind of floating out there to see if anything bit. But the Sinister Six felt very different. This was a movie that already had a director attached and a script that was being worked on. They were very much trying to fast track this thing. Had Sony not been so obsessed with getting a Sinister Six movie off the ground, perhaps they could have created some better foundations with Amazing Spider-Man 2, built more enthusiasm for that franchise, and really utilized their killer cast. Perhaps they could have then more naturally built out into spin-offs and other franchises. And maybe under these conditions, they would have been able to build an actual Sinister Six with characters that fans wanted to see more of. But we'll never know, because you can't make a universe with characters no one cares about. This leads us to suspect number 2, the characters.
The hell are you supposed to be?
I am Venom. I'm just kidding, it's Dr. Michael Morgan.
The first major issue in building a Sinister Six was Sony's choice in properties. At the start, they didn't do too bad. Venom was a good movie to lead his own franchise. He was popular, had an anti-hero run, and had many solo comics. He had that star power to carry a franchise. And, to be honest, he did. These were easily the most financially successful, the most popular, and really the only films in the entire series to make any money. Every other character they attempted crashed and burned at the box office. Hired gun Ruben Fletcher was brought on to direct, and they also landed a strong lead in Tom Hardy. Yet there was still that little issue of Venom needing to bypass that pesky Spider-Man origin. Here, Spider-Man has no involvement. Instead, the symbiote comes to Earth and is captured by a mad scientist before reporter Eddie Brock connects with it while doing some journalistic sleuthing. So there you go. You got out of having to use Spider-Man, just completely circumvented him. Unfortunately, not having him there means you also kind of have to change Venom's powers completely. Traditionally, Venom mimics Spider-Man's powers. He's kind of this demonic double. Now, lots of heroes have doppelganger villains. You know, villains who kind of look similar and have the exact same power set. But Venom may be one of the most unique of these. This Venom, though, it's taking more after its ultimate counterpart, with his main powers being big, biting off heads, and using black tentacles and sludge. Less of him web-slinging around like they did in the Raimi films. Venom's personality also goes through a major overhaul. Though the first film, it does a better job of balancing a sense of comedy and self-seriousness, the later films really lean heavily into that buffoonery. This version of the Venom symbiote, it talks, cracks jokes, and is a self-admitted loser.
On my planet, I am kind of a loser, like you.
That's a far cry from the comics, where he was considered a dangerous entity and accidentally set free by a naive Peter. Hardy is playing both Brock and voices Venom. As the franchise went on, he portrayed them more and more as this comedic duo or odd couple, almost in the vein of a romantic comedy, where the two sides kind of push and pull and annoy one another before finally coming together.
When you love someone, you accept the whole person.
You just said that you love me.
Man, let's do some serious couples counseling.
This is very different from the comic, but not altogether a bad character arc. This is a dynamic that's been used to great effect since all the way back in 1934 with It Happened One Night. It's kind of weird to do that with, Venom and Eddie Brock, but hey, it can still work and make something amusing and fun. The problem here is more that things started to get too goofy. It was the Flanderization effect from The Simpsons.
We're Venom!
We are
Venom!
no.
Where a base attribute overwhelms a personality to become completely dominant. Venom got increasingly stupid as Eddie looked like he was just perpetually suffering from a hangover. This, again, is a far cry from the comics, where Eddie is portrayed as this morally questionable, bitter, yet ambitious person who hates Spider-Man for revealing his fraud. And Venom is a demonic monster that has to be controlled by strength of will, a malicious entity that gives great power to his host while feeding on their aggression, a constant struggle between the symbiote and host for control. Certainly, they were not spending a lot of time bickering like an old married couple, then making up. So the result of all this is a Venom that may visually look like the character, and the design, it really does capture the look of the comics. That part feels really loyal to the source. But when it comes to the personality, story, and even powers, he kind of comes off as Venom in name only. Hell, even calling him an anti-hero is a stretch. No, here he's just a straightforward hero who sometimes kills bad guys. And in my opinion, that's a lot less interesting. When Sony ultimately decided to expand on the Venom franchise and start building their other sinister crew, their choices of subjects could be just painfully head-scratching. In the original comics, the Sinister Six team traditionally consisted of Dr. Octopus, Sandman, Mysterio, Vulture, Kraven, and Electro. Instead, this one seems to be going with Venom, Morbius, Kraven, at least he's from the original team, maybe Vulture from the MCU gets sucked in, and Madam Web? You really do have to wonder who was asking for a Morbius, Madam Web, or Kraven solo movie. Anyone? Was anyone, even the most hardened fan, looking for that? Now, that's not to say you can't make it work. You can make anything work with the right creative team and the right passionate idea for the project. But there were just so many other better choices for characters that they could have gone with here. Instead, we get these really bizarre picks. A generic vampire villain, a blind old woman who can see the future, and a baddie mostly known for hunting Spider-Man, who again, they cannot use. But don't worry though, because Sony again has a foolproof plan that involves taking these three and making them nothing like their comic counterparts. Morbius, again, he looked the part kinda in the rare VFX shots where his face didn't look just like a bunch of ones and zeros. Like Venom, it is hard to call this guy a villain. He may be the most anti-hero on this list just simply because he slaughters a boat full of innocent people. I guess they were mercenaries, so I guess they're not that innocent. Anyways, after that, he really is just a straightforward hero who's trying to stop his evil friend. And for the record, the character of Milo, played by Matt Smith, he's far more reminiscent of Morbius from the comics than Jared Leto's Morbius ever is. It says a lot also that this character is so bland and uncharismatic that the most memorable thing about him is a line that's never said in the movie.
It's Morbin time.
Madam Web, on the other hand, she's no longer this blind old lady who uses her powers to manipulate others on the timeline from afar. Here, she's a sarcastic, hot young actor whose powers are wildly uneven and poorly explained. Yet, any attempt to actually explain those powers, it kind of makes you wish the makers just hadn't tried.
He was in the Amazon with my mom when she was researching spiders right before she died.
It's embarrassing the clumsy attempts it has to connect the character to the wider Spider-Man universe. It features Amazon tribes of Spider-Men, a bunch of Spider-Women who are absolutely useless, don't do anything, and a villain who looks exactly like Spider-Man and is just evil. And yeah, Ezekiel, he's kind of as accurate to the comic source as everyone else is here. Madam Web's powers, it seems to be she can sometimes see time loops and other times is able to create spiritual projections of herself that can physically save people. None of these rules are clear at all or what she can and cannot do. All of this is done with a sense of tired dismissal by the less than enthusiastic actress, Dakota Johnson, who I actually respect a lot for how much she just did not care about this movie.
I don't know. I don't want to talk about it.
Oh, wow.
It's going to jinx it.
No.
I don't want to talk about it.
Can you name the 3 Spider-Man Tom Holland movies?
Yeah. Spider-Man, here he comes.
Here he comes, yes.
Spider-Man, and he's back. Go the Goblet of Spider-Man.
She knew exactly what she was in, and she was just like, I don't care. Pay me, and I'll be on my way. Kraven the Hunter, he's probably the worst of the bunch. Instead of being a big game hunter that murders animals with his bare hands just for fun and then goes after Spider-Man for a challenge, here they've reimagined him as this animal conservationist who loves animals and instead decides to go murder mobsters. You pretty much lose the fun callback to Richard Connell's The Most Dangerous Game, which was the entire basis for the character. Again, you can see he's not really a villain. He's just a hero. Aaron Taylor Johnson doesn't even really resemble the character at all. And he only gets his iconic lion jacket pretty much in the last 50 seconds of the movie. That's it. That's as long as he wears it. And once again, you have another character, this time the father played by Russell Crowe, who feels more like Kraven from the comics than the main protagonist does. This is all happening because the producers are unwilling to portray these characters faithfully, or even as morally gray in the slightest. If killing bad guys makes you an anti-hero, then almost every 80s action star from Die Hard to Indiana Jones is an anti-hero. These are not the characters from the comics. They may look like them, sometimes, usually not even that, but they have none of their attributes that made them popular. And when it comes to Morbius and Madam Web, I'm using the term popular very loosely here. In the case of Venom and Kraven, without Spider-Man, it feels as if the main ingredient is missing. And that's not to say you cannot make villain movies without the lead hero. They've done it. Don't forget, the first Joker movie made over $1 billion at the box office. There's also recently The Penguin from HBO Max. But both those examples are notably different from Sony's attempt, in that they actually kept the villains as villains. They're still the bad guys. Avi Arad was still basing all these movies off a story template that he had perfected in the early 2000s. The problem was the genre had outgrown these worn-out tropes. They had long since moved past the sloppy, awkward superhero films of yesteryear. Suspect number 3, dated genre filmmaking. I dare anyone to try this test. Go back and watch Catwoman. Yes, the terrible one with Halle Berry. I know you don't want to, but it's for your own good. Immediately after you finish it, turn on one of the SSU movies. Any of them. It doesn't matter which one. You will be overwhelmed by a just dreadful sense of familiarity. Whether that be Venom yelling at his neighbors to turn down the music.
Yeah, I'll just turn right down.
Thank you.
You could turn the music down just a little.
Or Milo's cheesy evil dance. Or blatantly bad dialogue in Madam Web.
Where's my spider?
They took my spider.
What a perfect idea.
Or a stone-skinned baddie whose main power seems to be that his skin's really hard in Kraven the Hunter.
Skin like living marble.
Yeah, look, I can keep going on these forever, all right? You can mix and match clips to pretty much any movie from the 2000s.
Have sex, excel, put my hands against, put my best, put my ten.
Every one of these Sony films feels like something from a bygone age. They all feel like movies that would have been more at home in the early 2000s, where the producers didn't fully understand the appeal of comic book movies. That's because in the early 2000s, the genre was only just starting to pick up steam. Before this, they had found only limited success in the Superman movies with Christopher Reeve, the always reliable Batman film, or the often forgotten or underappreciated Zorro, who had been around so long his first movie was all the way back in 1920. Like and subscribe to see that, I guess, because we are covering Zorro very soon.
Yep, I guess Christmas came early this year.
Yeah, Santa should have wrapped it.
What?
Did I stutter, Megan?
But outside those main three of Superman, Batman, and Zorro, and a couple others that get sprinkled in, the genre was largely untapped. The late 1990s and 2000 saw the rise of CGI, and it changed everything. Now heroes were able to be shown on screen exactly as they were in the comics, capable of feats no one in real life could ever accomplish. This is what opened up the entire genre. And did they do it faithfully? Kinda not. It depended on a case-by-case basis. Like any fledgling genre, there was a learning curve involved. The movies in the beginning, they really struggled with how much to lean into the comic bookiness, how much to adapt directly, and when to divert away and change things. Typically at this time, they leaned way too far into the latter.
What would you prefer? Yellow spandex?
Yes, obviously. People would like to see the character look like the character. Instead, these early films, they often, fell back on safe and familiar elements. X-Men, Daredevil, and Catwoman, they all had a very similar aesthetic. They all wore leather costumes similar to The Matrix. Spider-Man, it leaned into the heartwarming but sometimes cheesy Richard Donner sentimentalism. Punisher was probably the safest one of all, as it became a standard issue 1990s shoot-'em-up revenge flick. Ang Lee's Hulk was really the one that tried a big swing by fully embracing its comic roots, down to even the editing. And the result was it was largely ridiculed for it, sometimes fairly and sometimes unfairly. It ultimately became both a commercial and critical failure. Because of this, the message to the producers was clear. Stick to what people know. Certain elements of comic books were untrustworthy and risky. Producers had no idea how an audience may respond if they gave Wolverine a yellow costume, or Green Goblin his iconic mask, settling for black leather for the former and a Power Rangers suit for the latter. It may be corny, but at least a known entity. We can't be scaring children with a comic-accurate demonic goblin mask, okay? Which they did build, by the way. That thing was great, they should have used it. This era of comic book movies, they lacked confidence. That is not the world we live in today, where Marvel is all too happy to make a giant purple alien with a magic glove the main villain of 24 movies. Comic book movies of early 2000 felt like a kid dipping their toes into a swimming pool to make sure that the water isn't too cool. Marvel Studios was the fat kid who does this big cannonball into the middle of the pool without a care in the world. And if you want an example of how out of date these movies feel, look no further than the scene where Eddie Brock struggles to buy a physical newspaper from a scalper, all so he can read the news. In 2018, okay? Does he not have a phone? Sony really had no idea what they wanted these movies to be, so they mixed and matched jarring scenes together. Morbius struggling with his humanity while Matt Smith is dancing around to a song that's like half sex, I guess. Or Riz Ahmed trying to wax philosophical before whining into his mic for people to bring me my creature.
Trace, bring me back my creature.
Woody Harrelson getting paid to wear a Ronald McDonald wig at the end of Venom, then hamming it up in Let There Be Carnage. Or Madam Web, who has to bring in 3 different Spider-Women, put them in a bad CW costume, and then proceed to not show how they got their powers, why they got their powers, or how they even become those superheroes in the first place in the actual movie. This makes you wonder why the Spider-Women, they're there in the first place. Then you got the dramatic mobster scenes in Craven that's mixed with whatever this is.
All of our guys are dead.
There is no sign of a cohesive vision for this franchise. It's missing that confident stride forward. The closest I think Sony ever gets is when they brought in Andy Serkis for Let There Be Carnage. Now, this film felt extremely stripped down to the point of having pretty much no meat on the bone. However, mercifully, that meant it was also only an hour and a half long, so thank you for that, Andy. But I will say this for Let There Be Carnage. It at least had a solid direction of making a romantic comedy with Eddie and Brock as this funny gay couple.
I am out of the Eddie closet!
And that's not me knocking it either, okay? That's at least some sort of a clear vision, even if the results were wildly uneven. Most of the other Sony movies are just reverting back to the safe and familiar, things we've seen before, almost to the point of just being completely overburdened by cliches. Such as the scene where Morbius decides he's going to stand up in a storm of bats that's identical to Batman Begins, all the way down to the music. It's taking everything from somewhere else, and even when it doesn't, in the rare scenes where it is being original, someone else comes along and completely outperforms them and outdoes them. And I'm not talking about Marvel here. Venom got outdone by a very little indie film called Upgrade, a film about a man who's also dealing with an intrusive consciousness who is guiding his actions, protecting him, and forcing him into these morally questionable decisions. And it pulled it off with far more style. Madam Web is a time travel movie that does nothing with its central concept and is outdone by Nick Cage's next film from 2007. And next isn't exactly a high bar to clear. Morbius was outdone by basically every recent vampire movie in the last 10 years. Take your pick, but let's go with Sinners and Nosferatu for this one. Getting back to Catwoman again here, because I know you guys really wanted to get back to that. When I say it's pulling from its playbook, I really do mean it. There are many more parallels. You have a character who barely represents her comic counterpart. Batman, the character most associated with Catwoman, never appears in the film and is never referenced. Halle Berry doesn't even play Selena Kyle. She plays a completely original made-up character. It goes with this entirely original backstory while giving Catwoman powers she never had in the comics, and a costume that only reflects her comic counterpart at the most basic level. The ears. It's the ears. It does this all while shoehorning in iconic lines from much better movies.
Yeah.
It had these strange scenes of comedic goofiness between moments of unconvincing melodrama and a completely wasted cast. In other words, this film, for some ungodly reason, somehow became the template for the entire Sony universe. Don't ask me why, don't ask me how, but it happened. Needless to say, when following this template, you can't be that surprised that much of the SSU is just packed with bad movies. So let's just get to suspect number 4, okay? They're bad movies.
It's a curse. You have no idea of the torment and torture of dying over and over again.
Well, this sucks.
And you might be saying right now, it has to be this one, right? Well, not necessarily. Studios have shown time and time again they're perfectly happy to continue making crap so long as they make money off of it. Quality, ultimately to them, means nothing if dollars are still flowing into the studio coffers. And at first, the money was a-flowin'. Venom made over $800 million, and while the sequels didn't do quite as well, it still roped in a healthy $500 million on a $100 million budget. The first 2 Venom movies may not be high cinema, but at least from a filmmaking angle, they are competent. The visual effects look good, and there are some good action scenes, and the editing is thankfully coherent, so you can tell what's actually happening in the scene. Almost, I guess. The first Venom movie does have a fight with another black symbiote that basically looks like someone took 2 buckets of paint and threw it at the camera. We had no idea how good we had it. With Morbius, the quality goes completely downhill. This is where things fell apart very quickly. Here, the SSU begins to get a reputation in the industry for weak scripting, bad line reading, and ADR that is so obviously new lines, it starts to feel like you're watching a dubbed anime movie. Not even the action is salvageable, as the CGI is weak and looks like bad CGI face masks as fake blood splatters across the lens, and the cutting makes everything nearly impossible to follow. Morbius was also the first one to bring us the bad flashbacks with exceptionally bad acting. My favorite scene involves a breeze from inside the building that blows a letter outside, and then an orphan ends up getting beaten by a bunch of bullies. Anyways, can you get any more cliche? This is also the first movie where the internet truly united to openly mock it. First, for the overly serious take from Jared Leto, who's doing his usual method actor shenanigans. On Suicide Squad, he was always in character as the Joker and sending people like condoms and stuff. Here, he's just kind of being a nuisance as he has to constantly be using his crutches and slowing down production. So I'm sure that was great for the AD. This film is so hack that even the most casual cinema viewer knew that they were watching just slop. The average moviegoer punished it by making it a flop at the box office and spawning endless mocking memes. Thus, It's Morbin Time was born, the most famous quote to never have been said.
Well, no, I actually didn't even know what that meant until yesterday.
Well,
it's Morbin Time. Apparently, it's a meme, isn't it?
It's a line from one of your films.
No, it's not even in the film.
They also made a meme called Morbius Sweep, which, made the rounds mocking the empty theater screenings, claiming the movie as this massive success. It wasn't, obviously. Yet, for some reason, the Sony executives were convinced that the memes meant the internet was laughing with them, not at them.
They're laughing with me, Michael! They're laughing with me!
This made them decide to re-release the movie into theaters to capitalize on the viral attention. They even released this promotional video, I guess, with Jared Leto acknowledging the Morbin quote. Yeah, that had the same effect as a middle school teacher who tries to pretend he's in on a joke with his students, thus killing it pretty much instantly. Morbius had the high honor of being the first film to flop twice. But don't worry, said the Sony producers, they had Madame Web queued up next, a surefire hit. This movie didn't even make it to theaters before being openly targeted by internet ire. Everyone ridiculing some of the bad dialogue and bad line reading from the teaser.
Without sound, we wouldn't have been able to hear such classic lines as, "You're gonna need a bigger boat. I'll have what she's having. And he was in the Amazon with my mother when she was researching spiders just before she died."
That one line alone let everyone know exactly what they were in for. Every problem in Morbius is basically taken by Madame Web and just cranked up to 11. I have an entire review, so you can go check that out for my full thoughts. But it is crazy that professionals worked on this movie. Scenes do not fit together at all, and so ADR is often used as this crutch to the point that it starts to feel like you're listening to characters' internal monologues. You feel like you're starting to go crazy or that your audio isn't synced on your TV. The villain's ADR is hilarious, often not even close to matching his mouth.
I didn't know we'd be targeting teenagers.
They're teenagers now, but in the future, they have powers, and they will try to destroy me. I came from nothing, less than nothing. I will not give up everything I've built and have my life cut short.
Worst yet, people, when they come to these comic book movies, they're just looking for some simple pulp stories and some good action. But the action is terrible. Jump cuts, poorly constructed, lacking flow or cohesion, and just sometimes just not making any sense, okay? Just on a basic level. I think at one point, you see Madame Web stop like a rocket by holding up with her arm like a piece of metal instead of being just blown into bits on the rooftop. It doesn't help that all 4 of the protagonists here have no powers besides kinda, sometimes, seeing the future. Good thing Pepsi was there to save the day. And don't worry, we're getting to Pepsi. Luckily, Sony decided to try and save themselves by having a third Venom movie follow up the catastrophe that was Madame Web. Now, certainly the flagship franchise, and oh my god, that hurts even saying that, but hopefully the flagship series could deliver halfway competent action sequences. But no, A lot of those same problems from Morbius and Madame Web, they continued to lesser extent, but were still present in the third Venom movie. Most of Venom's dialogue here felt less scripted and more like it was improvised. Often his comments sounded just like what someone thought would be funny in an ADR booth.
Kids, Echo and Leaf.
A lifetime in therapy.
Don't. Huh? Don't you dare. Wow, how beautiful are your children.
It's almost like they left Venom's dialogue blank and then filled it in later, matching it as best they could to the reaction. And the action here, it is fine, I guess. Venom's mostly fighting mindless monsters with a bunch of no-name symbiote allies. The film conveniently forgets that the first film has symbiosis be incredibly difficult, and it kills most people. Here, everyone's just slipping into their own Venom suit like they're, I don't know, Green Man from Always Sunny.
Because you are the Green Man. Green Man is saving your life right now, bro. Just go with the flow.
Most of the movie actually doesn't have much Venom in it at all. The writers were very clever here, okay? They created a narrative reason that Venom has to hide to avoid being discovered. This allows Eddie to wander around the desert or Vegas the entire movie in his sandals. And Sony, fortunately, doesn't have to pay any VFX artists overtime to sleep under their desks. That Venom tongue is not practical. It costs money. The Last Dance fully commits to being an outright slapstick comedy. Yet, ironically, it was the melodramatic ending that was probably the funniest part of the movie. A scene that sees Eddie walking around mourning a lost friend to the tune of Memories. That got the biggest laugh in my theater, and that is high comedy. Now, I don't want to be too mean about it, because it is still a major cut above Morbius or Madame Web. Don't get me wrong, but shaving with a blunt razor is more fun than watching Morbius and Madame Web. But this leaves us with the final climatic movie of the series, Kraven the Hunter. A film that really has in its head that it's a serious drama simply because they rated it R and they can say the F word and show a little bit of blood. It features flashbacks with bad acting, poorly constructed action scenes, talented actors just kind of wondering if they should fire their agents, actors in villainous roles who give laugh-out-loud performances, and a sense of self-seriousness that's completely oblivious to its own absurdity. You have again those bad ADR scenes, this time so terrible that they literally have a still picture in the movie with CGI blinking eyes and moving lips. It's like that joke from The Incredibles DVD come to life.
Why's everybody got lady lips? Are those human lips? Whose lips are those?
I was told it was a new process.
Oh, new process.
A breakthrough.
And what would that new process be, Mr. I? Cheap-orama? And now you have me involved in this commentary, further connecting me to work that is clearly inferior and connected me to a rabbit!
Kraven the Hunter managed to hit every single beat of a bad Sony movie. And make no mistake, I'm not saying you can't still have fun with these movies, ironically or otherwise. Enjoy them, watch them over and over. No skin off my nose. But when it comes to Morbius, Madame Web, and Kraven the Hunter in particular, these are not just subjectively bad movies. They are objectively bad. To kind of loosely quote the words of Robert McKee, filmmaking is based on principles. Principles are not outright rules. A principle says that something works this way for a reason. And if you break it, you better know what you're doing. A good example of this is breaking the 180 line rule in The Dark Knight, where you're supposed to stay on one side of the 180 line, and Christopher Nolan breaks it continuously. But it's a very direct and purposeful choice. It's not accidental. The stuff here is all accidental. They were breaking old Film 101 rules left and right without a care in the world, and breaking them for really no clear or good reason. The result is some truly bad movies worthy of all the ridicule and mockery. And bad movies lead to bad box office returns. And our suspect number 5.
Poor, penniless, bankrupt, no more money. We've got to have money.
Let's not spend too much time here. We all know that money talks. So certainly this is the primary reason that this universe died. Well, let's not be too hasty. Money is certainly one of the biggest reasons to close down the doors and call it a day. However, the Venom movies were still making money. Even though The Last Dance was the worst performing of the series, it still was a reasonable success. It made over $400 million on a $120 million budget. That's still profitable for the studio, and I'm sure they were happy about that, even if their numbers were going in the wrong direction, especially compared to the previous Venom movies. So who knows why they really decided to end the series? It's possible that Tom Hardy was only contracted for 3 films and fulfilled that contract. It is also possible that they didn't end this series. Bit of a spoiler tag here for all of you, so if you want to jump ahead, I guess I'll add the code into the video. I'm not sure if anyone cares, but just to be safe, whatever. At the end of The Last Dance, Venom dies. Oh no, you're weeping. Yet there's a piece of him that still remains in the MCU and could easily just be brought back to his universe again, and then there you go, Venom's back in the game again. And all of this would get jump-started a second time. So that's great. That's a dark timeline to consider. It is also possible Marvel Studios has plans for the character in Secret Wars or the upcoming Spider-Man 4. I certainly hope they don't try and merge these two franchises, but who can say how much control Sony has or not? As much as I would love to dance on the grave of the SSU, there is still a good chance that the Venom franchise could rise from the dead. The other movies in the series, they're not really that big of a mystery because they all bomb spectacularly. Remember, a movie must make double their production budget to be considered profitable within the production window. This is all due to the additional marketing overhead. Morbius made $160 million on an $85 million budget. Madam Web made about $100 million on a $100 million budget. And Kraven the Hunter felt the most pain with only $65 million on a $120 million budget. That was a massive money loser for them. In the case of Madam Web, Sony may have offset their losses with some good old-fashioned product placement. This really was some of the most brazen advertising that I have seen since Shazam decided to save the world by taming unicorns with Skittles.
Taste the rainbow.
This one's about on par with that. Pepsi here may as well have been a supporting character. Hell, it should have gotten top billing, as it's actually Pepsi who defeats the main villain. Money talks. I can see the studio moving away from these solo films as most of them have bombed, but Venom still found success even if each movie was making less money. For that reason, I'm not entirely convinced that the characters won't be back in the search for more money. And at this point, you may be asking yourself, where's Marvel in all this? Yes, we're bringing Marvel back again as suspect number 6. At this point, Marvel was feeling pretty good. They had gotten back Spider-Man in a joint agreement that allowed them to produce movies for Sony while Marvel Studios got to use them in team-up films. It was a match made in heaven. Except they kind of forgot that when you lay with vipers, prepare to get bit. Sony was never going to be content with their movies being isolated away from Spider-Man while the MCU gained all the benefits of the franchise. No, they were committed in their goal of uniting their shoddy universe with the MCU. And if Kevin Feige wouldn't allow them to do that, then Sony was perfectly happy to confuse the general audience into thinking that the Sony Marvel movies were official Marvel Studios movies. Rewinding back to the 90s again, when Marvel was selling off their characters to stave off bankruptcy, they made a condition that their logo had to be shown in front of every movie featuring their characters, all to raise brand awareness. And so the famous flipping page intro was born. However, this demand may have come back to bite them in the long run. I can only imagine Kevin Feige sitting there at the beginning of every Sony movie, just seeing those flipping pages that say, in association with Marvel, and just putting his head in his hands, just hiding his face. No, you're not associated with us. This opening logo used to be a requirement. Now, I don't think Marvel could stop Sony from throwing it up even if they wanted to. The benefits, they now cut in the other direction. And Sony was going the extra mile to convince the audience that their movies were part of the larger MCU. All the way down to the promotional campaign tour on Spider-Man Homecoming, which saw tension between Feige and Sony producer Amy Pascal.
Well, those movies will all take place in the world that we are now creating for Peter Parker. I mean, there'll be adjuncts to it. They may be different locations, but it will still all be in the same world, and they will be connected to each other as well.
So there is a chance that Tom Holland as Spider-Man will pop up somewhere over there? There's always a chance.
If you want to see a man's soul flee his body in real time, look no further than this clip. You can tell they never discussed this, and Feige was put on the spot in the moment and smiling through his clenched teeth at her response. Amy Pascal may have revealed way too much of what Sony was actually hoping for. It wouldn't be the last time Sony tinkered with Feige's delicate architecture. Morbius would use the plot of No Way Home to rip Michael Keaton out of the MCU and trap him in the worst franchise of all time. A choice I'm sure Michael Keaton was so enthusiastic about that he showed up for only one scene and voiced a completely nonsensical after-credits scene. Nobody thought this scene through. It doesn't make any sense.
Thanks for meeting me, Doc. I'm not sure how I got here. Has to do with Spider-Man, I think. But I think a bunch of guys like us should team up. Intriguing.
How did the Vulture get his old costume and wings back if, they were left in the other universe and he built them out of alien technology? Why would he assume Spider-Man had anything to do with it? And why would Morbius then decide that he's intrigued to team up against a superhero who he knows nothing about? Never mind, I don't want to think about it anymore. It's breaking my brain. None of this stopped Sony from putting Keaton in a bunch of the trailers. Again, the goal was to trick people into thinking this took place in the MCU, and featuring Vulture in the marketing was the perfect way to do it. Or if you need another example, how about the final scene in Let There Be Carnage, where we see Venom teleported into the MCU, where he watches Tom Holland B-roll on the television. Don't get too excited about these two meeting and duking it out, because as soon as Feige was back in charge for No Way Home, he promptly banished Venom back out of the MCU. Feige seemed to be playing his own sort of delicate balancing act here, keeping Sony invested and hoping maybe they could join the MCU, but never actually letting them too close to, blow it all up. This entire relationship and coordination was incredibly clumsy. Marvel Studios was clearly working with them to make these two cameos happen, but even then, Sony still fumbles the ball. In Venom: The Last Dance, they retcon these events, so instead of, Venom naturally fading out of the MCU due to the events of the story, instead, now he's being teleported by a portal that's created by this new villain, Null. You can't even get basic continuity right. My head is just hurting so much. Make it stop. Somebody make it stop, please. I 100% expect the Sony Venom to appear in either Spider-Man 4 or Secret Wars. In one of those two. It is the only opportunity Sony may have, as the MCU is right now in the middle of their multiverse hopping arc. It's really the best and possibly the only place they're going to get to have these characters merge. However, all this continues to show Sony's desperation to keep up this relationship. As much success as they've had with the Venom trilogy, it is nothing compared to the box office returns of the MCU Spider-Man. Spider-Man: No Way Home made almost as much as all three Venom movies combined for one movie. Sony wants to keep this relationship going. If not for the good of the fans, then certainly for the good of their bottom line. If Marvel had a role to play in the death of the SSU, it may have been that they were not willing to risk bad association to bad movies. They had enough of an image problem post-Endgame anyways, just all on their own. They didn't need anything else dragging them down. Sony may have been willing to keep those negative properties at a distance to maintain that relationship, at least for the time being. The question is not if Sony will continue to force their own movies on Marvel Studios. It is how far they will push it, and how long until they try again. With that, we are reaching the end. We now have 6 causes of death on the table. However, there's still one final primary suspect in my autopsy, one that I'm pretty sure is the true cause of death. And that brings us to our true killer, Into the Spider-Verse. Yeah, I'm considering the Spider-Verse films to be the real killer of the SSU. Now, when I first wrote this part, I decided that the real killer was the fact that they couldn't use Spider-Man, the lack of Spider-Man in general within these movies. It is a massive elephant in the room, but as I thought about it, I started to think it was a little bit more specific than that. It wasn't just Sony realizing that missing Spider-Man was the problem. They had to see it for themselves. No one can deny that Into the Spider-Verse was a massive success and revitalization for the franchise and the Sony animation brand. Into the Spider-Verse was not just one of the best Spider-Man movies, if not the best Spider-Man movie. It was not just the best animated movie of the year, and it was not just one of the best animated movies, frankly, ever. It was an animated movie that reshaped the animation industry for the first time maybe since Toy Story. A movie that completely broke the mold created by Pixar, and it ushered in a new age of hybrid animation. It wasn't the first film to try this style. Netflix's Klaus and Disney's Paperman had played with this style, but it was Into the Spider-Verse that exploded its popularity and took it to the next level. And it did it with one of pop culture's biggest icons. It was everything that Sony had been hoping to accomplish with the SSU. It introduced a lesser-known spin-off character as the primary protagonist, and they did it in a way that allowed them to use the classic Peter Parker as a supporting character. It introduced bold new takes on villains. It set up an entire trilogy and potential for spin-offs. It breathed life into the genre as opposed to sucking it out with a straw. Looking back at every category that killed the SSU, chasing the Sinister Six, the characters, feeling out of date, bad movies, money, and a strained relationship with Marvel, in every single one of these categories, Into the Spider-Verse thrived. It created a team-up that got people excited. Not the Sinister Six, but seeing Spider-Man variants all on screen together at the same time. It was a much more unique superhero team, and we hadn't seen anyone do anything like it yet. All the characters felt really well-rounded, especially Miles, who served as more of a modern stand-in for Gen Z teens, who grew up with modern technology and modern social anxieties. This made him feel as relatable as Peter Parker back in the 60s and 70s, but just in a new way. So it never really felt old or out of date. In fact, it did the opposite. Into the Spider-Verse was a trendsetter. It introduced the multiverse and may have played a big part in Marvel choosing the multiverse saga as their next big arc. For better or for worse, it did this while introducing new animation styles to the mainstream. The two movies are phenomenal. Into the Spider-Verse made my #1 of the year, and Across the Spider-Verse made my #2. Movies that are not just good kids films and genre films, but also push the envelope and feel like real art, made by animators working late nights and sleeping under their desks for their craft. And it shows on screen, with every frame looking like a panel from a comic. So much is going on that you will catch new things every time you watch. This makes the two movies endlessly rewatchable. Box office returns for Spider-Verse are heading in the right directions. The first film made a healthy profit of nearly $400 million on a $90 million budget. The sequel nearly doubled that gross on a very similar budget. Unlike Venom, the box office grew with each movie going higher and higher. That's exactly what you want to see from a new franchise. And Kevin Feige, he's been nothing but glowing about this movie. Again, he may very well have been trying to copy it to much less success over in the MCU. When you've got Marvel Studios trying to replicate what you're doing, you're moving in the right direction. This is a franchise Marvel Studios seems to want to be involved with. It's not some shakedown. So when you ask what killed the SSU, it is that collection of all these failures. They did fail to achieve everything on this list, and each failure cut deeper and snowballed into a bigger and bigger disaster. So can you be surprised when a film comes along and achieves everything that they were attempting, and that the producers then make the choice to pivot? Let's give some credit where it is due. I've been really punishing Amy Pascal and Avi Arad over this video, but they know a hot success when they see it. Of course, full credit goes to Lord and Miller and their killer directing teams and animators for bringing it all together. Changing your focus in the direction of success is needed for any studio to succeed. With Spider-Verse, Sony has actually found a film franchise that is unique, pushes the envelope, and is beloved not just by the fans, but by also the critics and even the Academy, taking home their first animated Best Picture. Is it a surprise that they threw out the old SSU with yesterday's trash? No, not really. And to be honest, I'm perfectly okay with it remaining in the garbage bin. Sony has found a better track to pursue and invest their money and efforts into. Don't take your eye off the bullseye now. And that's all I've got for this video. Do you agree with my solution here? Is Into the Spider-Verse the real killer of Sony's Marvel Universe? Let me know in the comments down below why I am so correct or so wrong. As always, thanks again for watching. Like and subscribe for more historical film flashbacks and modern movie analysis. We will be back soon with the highest grossing film of 1920, as well as a new Mission Impossible series. Thank you, and as always, keep those reels turning.